3 votes for the next president, the past president, Donald J. Trump.
We are just a few states away from Donald J. Trump securing the Republican nomination for president for the 3rd time, but he has just posted on Truth Social that he has made his selection for vice president. And it is J.D. Vance, the 39-year-old senator from Ohio. He writes this on Truth Social. After lengthy deliberation and thought and considering the tremendous talents of many others, I have decided that the person best suited to assume the position of Vice President of the United States is Senator J.D. Vance from the great state of Ohio. J.D. honorably served our country in the Marine Corps, graduated from Ohio State University in 2 years, summa cum laude, and is a Yale Law School graduate, where he was editor of the Yale Law Journal and president of the Yale Law Veterans Association. J.D.'s book, Hillbilly Elegy, became a major bestseller and movie as it championed the hardworking men and women of our country. J.D. has had a very successful business career in technology and finance, and now, during the campaign, will be strongly focused on the people he fought so brilliantly for, the American workers and farmers in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Minnesota, and far beyond. So, Donald J. Trump has made his announcement right in the middle of the roll call that J.D. Vance is his choice for number 2. It is a huge turnaround for J.D. Vance, who back in 2016 was one of Donald Trump's fiercest critics. He casting the then reality TV star as a total fraud. One phrase he used for Donald Trump, and a moral disaster. He even called him America's Hitler. But then he said he watched Donald Trump in office, and his actions proved him wrong. The senator now castigates all of the liberals who made his book a bestseller, as they thought, he says, a window into understanding Trumpism. His book did become an international bestseller. It really was what cast him into the public eye. Vance had, at least complained about Donald Trump's rise and called himself a never Trump guy. We've watched how that's changed since he says he changed his opinion of Trump by watching him. One of the things that J.D. Vance has done is gotten very close to Donald Trump's son. And we know that Donald Trump Jr. has very much pushed for J.D. Vance to be the vice presidential pick. He has been a reliable Trump supporter in Congress. He's been a reliable Trump supporter on the campaign trail. He was with him at a couple of appearances just in recent weeks. Let me go to Garrett Haake right now. And Garrett Haake, we know who the vice presidential pick is. It is the Ohio senator, just 2 years in office, J.D. Vance. Talk about it.
39 years old, Chris, a historic pick here by Donald Trump, and to my mind, a pick that shows a very confident candidate. J.D. Vance has recast himself in the MAGA mold in his time in the United States Senate. He's cast himself as a true believer in Trumpism, one of Donald Trump's most vociferous and often eloquent defenders on the campaign trail, on the television circuit. He's somebody who's not afraid to go outside the kind of Fox News bubble to defend Donald Trump in unlikely audiences, but he's someone who I think will be saddled with a lot of Donald Trump's policy positions, a lot of Donald Trump's more aggressive style, the things that people who like Donald Trump like about him, and the things who don't like Donald Trump don't like about him. He comes from Ohio, which has become obviously a safely red seat, but I think a lot of the theory here for Republicans and for Vance's supporters in Trump world was, if you really believe, as so many people do, that this race will come down to Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, J.D. Vance is someone who can speak to those voters there and who shores up Donald Trump more than he expands Donald Trump's reach. Now, I'm down here on the floor where news of this announcement has been kind of rippling through the delegates. I'm standing in the back of the Idaho delegation. Let me see. Mr. Labrador, can I grab you for a second? This is Ro Labrador. He's the Attorney General of the state of Idaho. We were looking at this announcement just a second ago. Yeah. You saw this. What does a J.D. Vance pick do in the Republican Party right now for Donald Trump?
Well, I think it gets the people energized to go out and vote for Donald Trump. I think, as you can tell here, people are very excited. They're very excited to make sure that we win this election, and I think it brings people together. I think there were a lot of really good candidates. So, I think the most important thing is who Trump was going to feel most comfortable with.
Does it help him with people who were not already Trump supporters? I imagine J.D. Vance will be a very popular selection in this room,
Correct.
But in living rooms all around the country where people are watching and still trying to make a decision, what does J.D. Vance do for Donald Trump?
Well, J.D. Vance wrote a very important book about what was happening in America, in Central America, in the areas where people were suffering from poverty, from drugs, from all these other issues. So he understands the issue really well. He came from poverty. He came from those areas where people are trying to get, to make America great again, to make sure that we help people in those areas. So I think he can speak to them and speak about their concerns and the issues that they're facing.
Democrats think the most important, or one of the most important issues in this race is going to be reproductive rights, protecting access to abortion. J.D. Vance has been somebody who's been in favor of a federal abortion ban. Obviously, that's not Donald Trump's position.
Correct.
Does he create vulnerabilities for the Republican ticket with that position?
Every time you pick a vice president, you're going to have issues that you agree and disagree with the president, but it's the president who actually decides what the policy for the presidency is, for the party, for the nation. So I think we're going to follow what President Trump wants to do.
And finally, we've been thinking about, frankly, the mortality of our presidential candidates a lot over the last couple of weeks. The question about whether Joe Biden should stay in this race, obviously the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Is the party, is the country going to be comfortable with a 39-year-old, been in the Senate just a few years, a heartbeat away from the presidency?
Well, he's 39. He's only been in the Senate for a long time, but he was a successful writer, successful cinematographer. He wrote, he had a great movie. He also was a successful businessman. He's had a lot of different experiences. So,
I mean, you and I are both old enough to remember when Republicans went after presidential candidate Barack Obama as being fundamentally not experienced enough with a very similar record. He was 10 years older.
He was 10 years older, but he didn't have the experiences that J.D. Vance had. So J.D., if you remember, Barack Obama was pretty much an organizer his whole life. J.D. Vance has done a lot of different things in his life.
All right, I will let you get back to watching this. Former Congressman, current Attorney General of Idaho, Raul Labrador, thank you for your time and for jumping up. So, Chris, again, this is a pick that I expect will go over extremely well in this room. I think the question that the Trump campaign has at least answered to their satisfaction is that they believe it will at least do no harm, if not help Donald Trump reach the voters that they believe are so critical to their campaign in those Rust Belt states. The Trump campaign has talked about the idea that they know they have a weakness with the voters in the Republican Party who voted for Nikki Haley in Republican primaries, suburban women, sort of, quote-unquote soccer moms, some of this traditional base of the Republican Party. They have long believed they can replace those voters with more blue-collar voters, union members, young Latino and African-American men, folks who used to reliably vote Democrat. A J.D. Vance pick tells me they are aggressively going to pursue that strategy in those states, over perhaps trying to win back some of those voters who had been more important parts of Republican coalitions of a Mitt Romney or a George W. Bush in the past, Chris.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.